reviewing confined animal feeding operations, including what is considered to be a confined animal feeding operation and what that permitting process looks like. In eastern Ohio, we don't have as many of these operations compared to out west, but questions about these facilities have come up due to an increase in interest in recent years in large-scale poultry production within this part of the state. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be referring to confined animal feeding operations as CAFOs. So what exactly does it mean to be a CAFO? These operations are considered to be large-scale livestock facilities that have the potential for discharge into waters of the state, which can lead ultimately to water quality impairment in Ohio if not managed correctly. Approximately 6% of animal feeding operations in the U.S. are considered to be CAFOs. Of these operations, there are about 150 large CAFOs in Ohio. A majority of them, as I mentioned before, are located on the western side of the state, but we do have a few on the eastern side. If you are thinking about getting into large-scale poultry production, then you will likely need to become familiar with regulations around these operations. Smaller operations also have applied for coverage under certain permits related to CAFOs, especially if they generate manure, litter, and processed wastewater, which can contain pollutants like nitrogen, phosphorus, metals, as well as bacteria. What exactly makes up a confinement facility? Well, first of all, we have our production area. The production area pretty much encompasses everything in an operation, whether it's the animal confinement, manure storage, raw material storage, or waste containment areas. The animal confinement area includes, but is not limited to, open lots, freestall barns, confinement houses, barnyards, animal walkways, among many others. Likewise, manure storage areas includes, but are also not limited to, lagoons, runoff ponds, storage sheds, and stockpiles. The raw material storage areas include feed silos, silage bunkers, and bedding material. And then finally, we have the waste containment area that has a lot of the settling basins and areas within berms and diversions, which separate uncontaminated stormwater. Also included in the definition of a production area is any egg washing or egg processing facility, especially when we are talking about layers, and any area used in storage, handling, treatment, or disposal of mortalities. Large CAFOs will need to apply for related permits. Here we have a listing of the different numbers that are needed to meet the threshold of being considered a large CAFO. So for example, we have 700 mature dairy cows or higher, then your operation would be considered a large facility. If we have, if we're working with poultry, that gets a little bit more complex. It depends on what type of poultry you're working with, whether they're layers or another type, or it also depends on the manure handling system. If you have a liquid manure handling system, your threshold is much lower. So here we can see we have 30,000 laying hens or broilers are needed to be considered large. Whereas if we're dealing with something other than liquid manure handling systems, we can have a lot more birds before we meet that threshold. To be considered in the medium category, once again, the numbers might be based on the type of manure handling system when we're talking about poultry. In addition to these numbers, medium feeding operations that meet the following must apply to become a CAFO and be subject to the CAFO related regulations. Pollutants are discharged directly into waters of the United States through a man-made ditch, flushing system, or other similar man-made device, or pollutants are discharged directly into waters of the U.S., which originate outside of or pass over, across, or through a facility, or otherwise come into direct contact with the animals confined in that operation. Discharge means a facility was designed, constructed, operated, and maintained in such a manner that it is likely a discharge will occur. There is no exemption for large storm events. A discharge at any magnitude, or if you suspect that there might be a discharge at any magnitude, will need a permit. Smaller operations, or operations that have fewer animals that are outside of that medium range listed on the previous slide, can still be considered CAFOs if the Ohio EPA director determines that the operation is a significant contributor of pollutants into waters of the U.S. These operations, however, will be notified if they fall into this category. They're not expected to know right away if they are a contributor or not. Larger operations, however, that meet the CAFO definitions and discharge or propose to discharge may be subject to penalties if they fail to apply for the required permits. Any animal feeding operation that meets the criteria for one of the CAFO categories previously mentioned are regulated under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Systems, which is abbreviated NPDES, permit program. Created in 1972 by the Clean Water Act, the NPDES permit program falls under the Environmental Protection Agency, which then delegates permitting, administration, and enforcement to state agencies. The permit covers facilities discharging pollutants from a point source to a water of the state. Pollutants are broadly defined as any type of industrial, municipal, or agricultural wastewater. Not all discharges, however, fall under this program. To view the excluded types of discharge, visit epa.ohio.gov. Once an NPDES permit is obtained, it is valid for 5 years. Waters of the state mentioned here include, but are not limited to, streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, wells, and springs. Wastewater discharges entering a conveyance system like a ditch or a storm sewer that leads to a waterway may also require an NPDES permit. These permits were developed not only to limit pollutants in wastewater discharges, but to establish other compliance requirements that meet Ohio's water quality standards as well as federal regulations. Compliance in the permitting program includes monitoring, record keeping, and operating conditions. There are several government cost share, loan, and grant programs that may help assist with the cost of becoming NPDES compliant. Examples of funding programs as well as record-keeping documents can be found on the Ohio EPA's website at epa.ohio.gov. To apply for coverage under the NPDES CAFO permit, you must complete the required paperwork 180 days prior to commencing an operation, and then submit them to the Ohio EPA with the application fee and a complete manure management plan. In addition to regular sampling, each time a discharge occurs, it will need to be monitored. For regular manure and soil tests, test results are only as good as the samples that are submitted. Make sure to follow soil and manure sampling protocols or instructions. For soil testing, between 10 to 20 subsamples will be needed from areas with consistent features. That is, same soil types, same slopes, same drainage, etc. Soil testing can be done once every 3 years. Here are a few requirements for the permitting process. Develop a manure management plan that includes the best management practices to protect water quality. Along with the manure management plan, apply manure based on nitrogen and phosphorus restrictions. Don't over-apply on nitrogen and don't over-apply on phosphorus based on what your soil test tells you. Maintain records to ensure compliance. Records can also help identify inefficiencies in an operation. EPA.ohio.gov has some example record-keeping forms with everything that you need to track. And finally, there will also be an annual report that is required to maintain compliance. Discharge from an operations production area is prohibited. There are, of course, a couple of exceptions. For example, if there is a 25-year storm that lasts for 24 hours, some discharge may be unavoidable. Under these circumstances, however, operators are expected to keep their records up to date for penalties to not be applied. Also, the production area needs to be designed, built, operated, and maintained to handle all of the manure, litter, and processed wastewater. And the discharge cannot exceed the Ohio water quality standards. If records are not kept and facilities are not up to par, that operation can be subject to enforcement. Keep in mind that even if a medium or small facility only discharges during these events, that facility will still need to obtain an NPDES permit since they do experience some discharge. They would no longer be exempt from the permitting process. Also prohibited, discharges resulting from improper mortality management, improper chemical disposal, and animals coming into direct contact with surface waters. Manure management plans should address storage capacity, disposal of dead animals, and the diversion of clean stormwater away from production areas and livestock. We also want to make sure that unused waste products and other contaminants are not entering storage structures or treatment systems. The manure management plan should also include a land application plan to comply with the permit. Part of this land application would be a total nutrient budget, manure and soil characteristics, as well as specific application methods and rates. We would also want to include any specific conservation practices. The first step in obtaining an NPDES permit is to submit a complete application at least 180 days prior to the facility use, or if applicable, the current permit's expiration date. The application will then undergo consideration by the Ohio EPA, who will conduct a cursory review that occurs within the month of receipt of that application. Once completed, a draft permit is written and made available for public comment for 30 days, while a pre-permit site inspection is conducted to verify that the application information is correct. The agency will respond to public comments and potentially hold a public meeting if there are concerns. After that, the permit is either issued or denied by the Director of the Ohio EPA. Any final actions may be appealed to the Environmental Reviews Appeals Commission. There are a couple of other permits related to CAFOs, including the permit to install issued by the Ohio Department of Agriculture. The goal of the PTI is to assure the proposed building, its facilities, and location will adequately support such an operation. The one-time application fee for the permit to install is slightly over $2,000 that is made payable to the Ohio Department of Agriculture. A farmer must submit a permit to install to ODA before starting any new construction or modification of a CAFO, often along with the permit to operate, or PTO, for any planned modifications. Included should be a detailed map of the manure storage or treatment facilities, boundaries of the facilities, location and sitting distance from the manure storage and treatment facilities, location of water supply wells, and the approximate location of all known subsurface drains within 100 feet of the proposed manure storage or treatment facility, along with the results of a subsurface geological study of the area. These subsurface results should include information on the soils, groundwater sampling and analysis, hydrology, geology, and topography of the land area used for manure storage or treatment facility. Also include any designs, plans, and detailed engineering drawings for the proposed construction of the facility with grading plans designed to manage stormwater runoff. In the state of Ohio, Ohio EPA has been delegated from the US EPA to implement the NPDES permit program. I know it's a mouthful. Therefore, CAFOs must apply to the Ohio EPA for coverage under the NPDES permit system. The state EPA has petitioned the US EPA for transfer of the CAFO NPDES permit program to the Ohio Department of Agriculture as well. There has been a challenge to the transfer in federal court as a violation of the Federal Clean Water Act. This lawsuit began in 2014 with a request for an injunction to prevent ODA from further issuing these permits to CAFOs and to keep the program under the Ohio EPA. The US EPA is currently in the process of considering this transfer, so there may be some changes with which agency handles what in the near future, although the general requirements will likely remain very much the same since they were set out by the US EPA. As discussed earlier, ODA does handle the PTI and PTO permits for CAFOs. For additional information about confined animal feeding operations, call, email, or visit the websites for ODA and the Ohio EPA. For non-permitted livestock and poultry farms, in the event of a discharge, small and medium-sized livestock and poultry operations should contact the Ohio Department of Agriculture, Division of Soil and Water Conservation at 614-265-6610. Or they can also contact the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency Spill Hotline at 1-800-282-9378. Thank you for tuning in this week. If you have questions about farm management and ag-log topics, you can reach me at 740-264-2212 or just shoot me an email at lion.194@osu.edu.
Good morning. I'm Dave Apsley with Ohio State University Extension. On July 10th, our virtual Day in the Woods program will focus on measuring trees. Normally, if we had a class on measuring trees, we would make this stick part of the registration. We'd actually hand you one when you walked in the door. But since we're going to have to meet virtually, we thought we'd have you make a stick in preparation for that event. This stick is called a tree measuring stick or a cruiser stick, and it consists of multiple scales. Today we're going to focus on having you make a stick with the two scales that we're going to discuss today. One is the Biltmore scale. It's called a Biltmore stick, and it's going to be across the top edge of the stick here. Essentially from the left edge and then on out, you'll have a scale of numbers, and as you hold this against the tree, and we'll show you how to do that in a later video, you're going to be able to measure the diameter of that tree. The other scale that we'll use often is the merit hypsometer. This scale that runs vertically on the stick helps us to estimate the merchantable or the saleable portion of the tree in logs. Each one of these numbers represents a 16-foot log. The ticks in the middle represent 8 feet or a half of a log. So the first step to making your own stick is to determine your arm reach. Most of the sticks that are available commercially are, the standard is 25-inch arm reach. And basically it's the distance between your eye and your hand, or where you're going to hold the stick. And the stick has to be held consistently at a distance to be accurate. So what we want you to do is determine your arm reach. I highly recommend just getting a yardstick, holding it up against your cheek, reaching out so that your arm is comfortable, and then seeing where your finger is. I'm very fortunate. My arm reaches right about 25 inches when I have my arm fully extended, so it's pretty easy for me to be consistent. It's really much more of a problem if you're very tall, because you're going to have to maintain a consistent bend in your arm, and over time that's hard to do. Also, if your arms are short and you have to continue to reach out to get that distance and hold your head back, that's hard to do too. So again, take a yardstick, hold it up against your cheek, slide your hand out, and see where your fingers are. If you're around 25 inches, give or take an inch, you're probably good. If you have a shorter arm reach or a longer arm reach, we're going to have tables available so you can make a custom stick that fits you. Let's get started. Now that we've got our arm reach, the next thing we need to do is select a nice piece of wood to make our stick with. This isn't super critical. You essentially need a piece of wood that is somewhere between 30 and 36 inches long. I just made these 36 inches long. This is actually a piece of pine. It's 1.5 inches wide, 36 inches long, and about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch thick. The real key is that the stick, when you look down it, is pretty straight and is pretty stout and stable. I don't like a real flimsy stick. These are great to carry in the woods. You can measure trees with, but you can also knock cobwebs out of the way, even greenbriers. So again, a nice piece, straight piece of wood is all you really need. Again, this is a piece of pine. It was actually something I ripped off of a piece of packing material that came from the lumber yard. I also found this piece of oak that would work very well as well. I think I'll save it for another project and just use the pine. If you don't have a piece of wood like this, you could go to the lumber yard. Even a broom handle, any piece of wood that is about 36 inches long could work. but ideally something about 1.5 inches wide, so you've got plenty of surface to write your numbers on. Again, about 30 to 36 inches long, and make sure that it's true and straight and doesn't have a big warp in it. Okay, let's get started adding the scales. These are the things that you're going to need to make a cruiser stick or a tree measuring stick. First of all, you'll want to print the table that I sent. This again is the table for the 25-inch arm reach, but I will also include a spreadsheet with different tabs for different arm reaches. And if that's not adequate for you, feel free to reach out to me at apsley, apsley.1@osu.edu, and I'll be glad to send you whatever arm reach table you need. You'll notice on this table you've got diameters, tree diameters starting at 6 and working their way down to 60, and then the distance from the left edge are going to be numbers in inches and 1/16. So if you're using that table, you're going to need a ruler or yardstick, preferably, that has 1/16. So here's a nice metal yardstick that I'm going to use for this process. You'll also need a pencil that's pretty sharp, some kind of marker. I really like these fine-tipped permanent markers. The ultra fine-tip Sharpie works very well. And then to make the job easier, I like a little framing square so that we can make the lines perpendicular to the edge. So that's all we're going to need, and it's really very simple. You're going to take your stick, you're going to look at the table, and the 6-inch diameter for a 25-inch arm reach is 5 6/16, which is also 5 3/8. So we just take our yardstick, we measure 5 3/8 inches from the edge, and we make a mark. I'd like to be as precise as I can, so I'd like to have this up near the edge. Again, 5 3/8. It's going to be about there. That's going to be the 6-inch. The 8-inch mark is at 6 15/16, so 6 15/16 is out here. We'll put another one on, and then 8 7/16 is the 10-inch mark. 8 7/16. It's going to be right there. So now we've got those marks. We're going to just make a nice square edge line across the edge, and you can design this however you want. I'll just make these lines all the way across. And we'll pencil in the diameter that goes with it. This is our 6, this is our 8, and this is our 10. And then we'll just continue to go across the stick to get the measurements. The 12-inch should be at 9 14/16 or 9 7/8. Should be out here. We've got 16 at 12.5, 18 at 13 12/16 or 13 3/4, 20 is at 14 15/16, so just shy of 15. And let's go ahead and square those off. Looks like I missed one in there. See, I've got too big a gap, so we're going to have to go back and figure out which one we missed, which is not a problem. So it's going to be the 12. I'm guessing this is the 16, the 18, and the 20. And let's go ahead and put the 14 in. It should be 11 3/16. So 11. Up here, closer to the edge. And 3/16. So we won't belabor the point here anymore. You can see the process. You just measure from the end, put your marks on there, and then label accordingly. That will give us our diameter or a Biltmore stick. I also recommend probably putting the arm reach, so 25-inch And then you also may want to put DBH for diameter at breast height for a standing tree. Okay, that's the process of making the Biltmore stick, and then you would complete the stick out to however far you want. If you've got a 36-inch stick, you can easily go to 60-inch diameter tree. The other thing that we're going to do is make the Merit hypsometer, and this is much simpler. It's based on right triangles, and 6 1/16 is the distance that needs to be on the stick for each log. So you just start at one end, the same end, preferably the same 0 end, and you go to 6 1/16, and that would be your 1 log height. 12 2/16 would be your 2 log height. 18 3/16 would be your 3 log height. 24 1/4 would be the 4 log height. And then 30 5/16 would be your 5 log height. That's probably plenty. And then you can also put a halfway mark for the half log. So at just like, it'd actually be 3 1/32. So right around 3 inches is where you're going to put the first mark, and then I would just go 3 inches up from each of those would be your half log marks. And then again, take your, and this is going to be 1 log. And I would probably just make these half logs maybe a half a tick like that so you can find them. It's going to be 2 logs, 3 logs, 4 logs, and 5 logs. So again, this is the Merit hypsometer. You also might want to write on here 1 log 16 feet. And obviously these numbers are very hard to see, so that's why we have the Sharpie. I would highly recommend you take the Sharpie and you just trace over the lines that you've got. Make them dark and then write your letters in nice and neatly, which I have a hard time doing. I have very poor hand-eye coordination, but this will get the job done. You can get as fancy as you want with this. You can decorate it, do whatever you want to personalize it. I highly recommend when you're done, if you're planning on using this for the long haul, to go ahead and put some kind of coating, like a poly coating on it, so that it'll last for a long time. And that's the process. That's all we need to do is to make the Biltmore stick and the Merit hypsometer. Be sure to try to make this by July 10th, and we'll show you how to use it. Thanks, and have a great day. Here's one final look at our tree measuring stick. You'll notice this is the Biltmore side of the stick, with 0 being on the left side. And then the first measurement we have on here is 6 inches. And then at 2-inch intervals, we go all the way up to 60 inches. Again, this is the Biltmore side of the stick. I'm going to turn the stick over, give you a good look at the tree height measuring side, which uses the Merit hypsometer. You'll notice I did turn these numbers sideways so that when you're holding the stick vertically, like we do when we measure a tree, you'll actually be able to see those numbers better and be able to read them off the stick. And then finally, in case you're wondering, this is one of the most expensive commercially available sticks on the market. It's actually got brass tips. This is a very old one. They call it a cruiser stick, which I love that terminology. You'll notice our scale lines up very well with theirs. Plenty precise enough to give us good diameter measurements. This stick is about $88 if you go to purchase it online. So we've saved you $88 if you're interested in a cruiser stick or a tree measuring stick. We look forward to seeing you on July 10th so we can teach you how to use this stick to measure the trees in your woods. Good luck making your own cruiser stick. Thank you.